page Lamed Gimel, and we were talking about the whole time about the two kavim, about the two lines that there is to be found in there's the two lines in Chamimus and Kriris, heat and cold, and the whole Seder Ishtalshlus has two lines. So he's going through every single level. In mitzvahs and Torah, there's two lines. Now he's going to speak about how in the actual creation of the world, there's also the idea of two lines as well. So I say, line 3 on page Lamed Gimel. Since the general avoid of a person is in this world, how they move, and it's understood. Also in the world there has to be these two components, the two lines, the two approaches. Be understood according to what the Marash explains in his mimer entitled Mikamoicham, from the year, or as he's saying, footnote, from Sefer Marim Tafresh Chav Tes. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said about different Mamorim of the Rebbeim, that there were certain Mamorim that every Rebbe had, that they used to repeat once every 2-3 years, L'tayres ha'aver, to purify the air. So the Rebbe says that of the Rebbe Marash, this Maimer Mikamoicha Ba'elim Avaya is also one of those Mamorim Shu Echad Madrushim Shoya Omer Achas L'shtayim L'shol Shonim. It's also this Maimer the Rebbe Marash used to say once every 2 or 3 years, Kedei L'tayres Avar Olam, to purify the atmosphere, the air of the world. And over there, it's explained about that also in the world, from what it talks from the fact that in the general avoid in the world, it involves two extremes, like we said, mitzvah asa, mitzvah loisa. There's two levels in Torah, and so on. So from this, it's understood that since the Torah and mitzvah is supposed to be done in the world, so you have the two levels in the world. In the world itself. So he says, line 10, that the idea behind this is the way the world came into being wasn't a way of something from nothing, and not in a way of cause and effect, for lack of a better translation. As much as there could be as many chain descents, one level after another level, from the Ilah to the Olul. Even the lowest and final effect and the final level on the chain will have some type of relationship and comparison to the first uppermost level in the chain, because each one caused the other, and each one evolved from the other, and each one emanated from the other. So because each one can be traced back to the level beyond it, so therefore even the lowest level has a relationship, though very far, to the highest level. As opposed to physical coming into being from the spiritual, there's no creation of something from nothing that is greater than the physical coming from the spiritual. Maybe Bala Ikrim, like the Marash brings from the Bala Ikrim. Venimtza comes out, on the one hand, the idea of the creation, the world being brought into being, is the ultimate type of concealment. As far as it is the ilal v'olul, and even if you could have an infinite sets of ilah and then olul and ilah and then olul and then ilah and then olul, ad sham kamish shayich b'zeh in ketz, to whatever degree it's possible to use the term without an end. So there's no comparison between that when you're saying Ali Savas Yesh Mayin V'Efes, when you have the coming into being from something that's completely Nothing. So on the one hand, it is yesh me'ayin. In other words, it has no significance whatsoever, no comparison whatsoever, no lakus. Along with this, that through the process of yesh me'ayin, something came into being, an existence came into being. Now we must say that this is an existence that actually exists. It's a real thing. What's the proof? Maybe it's all imaginary, maybe it's all fantasy, and so on. Feature maybe Sanhedrin, like the Maimon brings a raya for this from Mishnayos and Sanhedrin. It says concerning someone picking a vegetable on Shabbos, a gourd, kishuyim. He's picking it on Shabbos. We know picking, separating from the ground, that is a malacha d'oraisa, and a person is liable for a karm chatos if he does it by mistake. So he said, in Mishnah Sanhedrin says, Shnayim loiktim kishuyim. Two people are picking this vegetable, the kishuyim. Echad loikit potter. One person that's picking this vegetable will be not responsible, not liable to bring a karm chatos. Ve'echad loikit chayiv, and one that's picking it will be liable. And the Mishnah explains, the one that does an actual action, he literally separates the gourd, the kishuyim, from the ground that it's growing from. He is liable for a karm chatas. Top of page Lamed Daled. But someone that is only making an illusion, he makes it look as if he's doing so. He's not actually picking the gourd. So that he is released from the obligation because he didn't do a malacha. So this is a proof that the world is a true existence, or it's a real existence. True existence is a different definition of this. A real existence. Because if there's a difference in halacha between an illusion and something that you're actually doing, so you can't say that the world is an illusion. Because then, just like you're not liable for an illusion of picking the gourd, so you would not be liable for the real picking of the gourd, because it's not real, it's only an illusion, or just the opposite. If by the rules of this illusion you should be liable for picking a gourd that you think is real, should be the same thing for the illusion. So he says in the top of line number 1, since the one that does the action of actually picking the gourd, he is liable for the karm chatos. We're forced to say that it actually exists a world. So, therefore, on the one hand, we say yesh me'ayin, it is like completely of no significance. And on the other hand, we're saying it's existing. Again, these are like the two sides, the two lines that we've been talking about the whole time. Heat and cold, mitzvah asa, mitzvah loisa, existence and non-existence. So the Rebbe says, perhaps we'll say, you know what, in truth, it's all an illusion. The entire creation is an illusion. But the only reason why over here the person is liable is because Torah is turning it into a Metzias. We can't say that the existence over here is because of the mitzvah and the Torah, that the Torah in its mitzvah about picking or not picking the gourds on Shabbos is turning this into a Metzias, giving it substance, if you will. It's not in such a manner that the item on its own is an existence. The proof is not from someone doing a mitzvah. It's understood if someone doing a mitzvah, he's bringing more energy into it, he's giving it more vitality, he's giving it more substance. But here the case is just the opposite. The person is doing something against the will of the Creator. He is picking this and therefore transgressing one of the 39 prohibited malachas you're not supposed to do on Shabbos. Through this, he becomes something separated from godliness through picking these gourds. Since still in all it's possible to have in it two types of ways. In the thing that he's being separated from godliness, in doing against Hashem's will. There could be an illusion of doing against Hashem's will, or there could be an actual action where he's actually doing something against Hashem's will. How they move, and so it's understood that there must be in such a manner an existence, even though it's against Hashem's will, that Torah calls it doing an action. When Nimtza comes out, that from this comes out, and in the world there's also two opposites. On the one hand, the yesh comes from total nothingness, totally bottled to the ayin, has no real existence of its own, and on the other hand, it's a solid existing metzias. It's not an illusion. Oizvav, line 12. Just like in the world, there's to be found that, like we said, two opposite lines, so too also the Yidden. That the whole world was created for the sake of the Yidden, there must be two types of lines and two types of approaches, if you will, of their, if you will, bittul and metzias. Just like in the world, and in the matters that are in the world that a Yid needs to do their avodah, there has to be the yeshnam shnei yom chamim esukriras kanal. There are the two things of heat and coldness, like we said before. So too, it's also concerning the Yidden. That in Yidden there's also two lines, the binary system, on and off. Based on this, that in Yidden themselves there are these two things about, in other words, how the Yidden came into being and so on. We'll soon see. So here we can explain that the Zitcher Magid says, what it says in Chumash Bereshis, that Hashem said, let us make man in our form. How do we call a person, a creation, a Yid, in the form of Hashem? So he explains it as follows. Pirush. Al derech mashal, for example, Adam sheyesh ben. A person has a son. Afsha ben avram kineged panav v'halach mita. Even when the child passes or leaves him, goes away from his presence. He's not in front of his face. He's not in front of his eyes. Im kol zeh still nol nechkat surah shal ben b'machshava shal ha'av. The image of the son, of the child, is engraved in the thought of the father. But someone that never had a child, he cannot say that there's engraved in his mind, in his thought, the image of his son that he will later give birth to. Because the father has not yet seen him. He does not know what he looks like. This is how it's by human beings, that there is the image and the picture of the child engraved in his father's mind, always, but only once the child was born. By Hashem, we are his children, but Hashem doesn't have this limitation of first we have to be created and born and made for Hashem, for our image to be engraved in his mind. Line 23, but by Hashem it's possible to say, even before the Eden were created, that their image and their features and so on is engraved in his thought. Yisrael, all of Machshavah, the Chazal say, Yisrael arose in his thought. That means before even the creation, Yidden were already there in Hashem's thought. How is that possible? So the way he explains it is, Ki etzli yizbarach ha'avar va'asidecha. Because by Hashem, past and future is the same. So even though we haven't yet come into being, it's possible for us to be engraved in Hashem's mind, whereas by a human child, if we weren't born yet, it's impossible to say it. By the father, there's engraved the image of the unborn child in his mind. Okay, that is what the Mezritcher Magid explains on the pasuk, Nasa Adam Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, that Hashem created us according to the form. In other words, the image that's already there in Hashem's mind. So the Rebbe asks, seemingly, the means of the Mezritcher Magid explaining this, he seems to be bringing in things that are unnecessary to bring in. Line 26, seemingly it's not understood. Why does he initially bring an example from a person that has a child and then say, but by a person who has a child, he doesn't know him before, and by Hashem, he knows him before? Why doesn't he go straight to the point? He could have said initially, by Hashem, the past and the future are the same. Therefore, by Hashem, it's possible to say in our form and in our likeness and so on, before the person was created, that he already has, before the creation, he has already his form and his image in his mind. Why is it necessary to work through this whole thing that by a human being we have it like this, and Hashem it's different? Why go there at all? Top of page Lamed Hey. So the Rebbe explains, this will be understood according to what the Mezritcher Magid himself explains earlier in the first comment that he makes in the Mezritcher Magid Sefer Oira Torah. While the Mezritcher Magid is explaining the well-known statement of our Chachamim, that's brought on the Zoyar, Midrashim. The statement of Chacham is brought on both in the Zoyar and Medrash, where Rashi Meviyah B'tchil Spiritual Torah, and Rashi brings it at the beginning of his commentary on the Torah. What is this well-known statement of Chachamim? Lo'hoya tzarich lahaschil as ha-Torah ela ma'chodesh zalachem, that the Torah should not have begun from not from Bereshit, should have started from the first mitzvah in the Torah, Chodesh Zolachem, where the Yidden as a people were commanded the mitzvahs of the Karban Pesach. Why did Hashem reveal to the Yidden in the Torah the entire story of creation, etc.? And the Mezritcher Magid explains the reason for this. The reason why the Torah began from Chumash Bereshit instead of going straight to the mitzvahs of the Torah in Chodesh Zolachem, it's like a father that minimizes his mind, umedaber divrei katnus, even though he might be a great chacham, but he speaks childish things. What is this a metaphor? It's a metaphor for the idea of the creation. The idea of creation, the Chazal call Maisa Bereshis, is called a minor thing. Halachas, it says over there about the Havayas of Abaye v'Rava, the discussions of Abaye v'Rava, the halacha, that is a Dover Gadol. Dover Cotton is the creation. So Hashem begins with minor things. B'shvil, line 8, Noya Cotton, for his young child, Kidei sheyiyeh laben tainuk cholu, so that the child should delight in it and enjoy it, because if the father would speak deep things that the child doesn't understand, he wouldn't enjoy it. It wouldn't be pleasurable for the child. Even if the child does understand, it might be just a school lesson, it's not enjoyable. Just to put a simple spin on it. For example, telling a child would more likely want to hear a story from his father, from his teacher, from an adult, then he wants to hear, you got to do this, you got to do that, this halacha, that halacha, this mitzvah, that mitzvah. So Hashem is talking to his young child, And just like a father talking to his young child, and he begins with davar katan, he begins with the simple things, the minor things, the more childish things. And this is not just a delight for the child, but also v'lechein misanig mizeh gam ha'av. Therefore, because he sees how the child delights in it, so the father also delights in this. Seemingly it's not understood, the mashal from a young child. This is what the Mezritcher Maggid says. Now the Rebbe again asks on the Mezritcher Maggid, he says, it's not understood what is this mashal that we are saying that the Torah began from Bereshis, because it's like a father teaching a young child that he starts off with minor things. This makes sense down here below in the physical realm. The child is born when he's small. That's how he's born. And then he grows up and matures. So you talk to the child when he's still a child in childish matters. And then when he grows up, you talk to him more mature things. As opposed to Hashem, the way the creation could be is that initially the child should be an adult. It didn't have to go through childhood, and therefore we have to speak to the child about childish things. And not only it could have been that way, the Rebbe says it was that way. Especially since this is the way the actual coming into being was. Like it's brought down the Medrash. That Adam and Chavra were born as 20-year-old, fully mature adults. That's what it means, b'tzivyoinam nivru, in their fully formed character. Because in Torah there's no question what came first, the chicken or the egg. There was no eggs created in the Ma'aseh Bereshis. Fully formed chickens were created. Fully formed trees, fully formed rocks. Everything was fully formed. That's what it means, b'tzivyoinam nivru. So we were created as fully mature. Therefore, we were adults. If we were adults, what is the example that he says that just like a child, you have to talk to him about childish things, and the father, even though he might be a great sage, he constricts his mind and limits his mind to talk about things that the child will appreciate. We're not children. We were created as adults. So the Rebbe explains the Vart of the Mezritcher Maggid, line 15, the idea behind this is, since the avoid of a person has to be on one's own power, a person needs to do their avodah by their work. Therefore, yeshnoi eitzel ish Yisrael ha'inyan de b'nai hakot. There's by a Jewish person the idea of being a young child, because by doing our own work, it's a step-by-step thing. We have to grow into it. We have to develop. Our work at first is not the same way how it's the next week, the next year, the next 10 years, and so on. That's the idea of growing and maturing. So what do we see? That since the avodah has to be b'koyach atzmai, and that's why yesh ne'etzil ish Yisrael in the b'nai hakoten, hainu inyan shel katnus. It's an idea of being immature, a child, and so on. But ubiyachad im zeh hu b'nai sheyesh lo shaychus alav. Along with being a child, he's still his son, that he has a connection with the father. Again, we're trying to bring two lines, like yesh me'ayin, and still it's in existence. That's also why in the next part of the Eira Torah that the Mezritcher Maggid explains, when he explains Nasa the Mitzalmeinu, initially he explains the marshal from a person that has a son. First there has to be the existence of the son. And afterwards, once the child is born, only then, by a human child down here, can it be engraved in the mind of the father. And only after explaining how it is by a human child down here, it's explained, even before the Eden were created, their form was engraved in his thought. Asher achiluk bezehu, that the difference over here is, like the Alter Rebbe explains the Torah, that even though a son comes from the brain of his father, the son is considered as if he is a leg of the father. But that is initially in the state that he is initially created in. But afterwards the child becomes separated from his father. And now he becomes a separate entity. There's the father and there's the son, and the son is not a foot of his father anymore. For this reason, there's a difference between a Yid's responsibility towards Hashem versus a child towards his father. Therefore, a child, he is not obligated to literally give up his life for the love of his father, because your own life takes precedence even over your father's life. Not only when it comes to life, but even a monetary loss. If a person has the opportunity of saving his own possession from being lost, or his father's possession. Let's say, the example the Gemara says, there's a big flood, and items belonging to him and items belonging to his father are going to be flooded out to sea and be lost forever. And you can imagine other type of situations, a fire, whatever it is. So there is the din is avedasa kedam eschulu. A person's own possessions, his own object that's going to be lost, takes precedence. Why? Because once I was created now as a separate entity. And being that I was created as a separate entity, I am now not the father. But, and here's the contrast, the neshama is not that way. Rakulacha, the neshama is entirely one with Hashem. Vein and nefredes mean many is barach klal, it's not separated from the Eibishter whatsoever. This means v'hainu shafilu la'achle shenas adam etzalmeinu goymer. Even after Hashem said, let us make man in our form and our likeness, he's still a part of Hashem above Mamish. He is still connected to Hashem. And therefore, the obligation of a Yid towards Hashem is stronger to the greatest degree than his obligation to his father. Therefore, a child is obligated to have a love to Hashem in a way of total self-sacrifice. But this type of connection, we need to grow over here. Just like we said concerning the teaching of the Torah, that even though we are mature, we still need to have the growth b'koyach atzmai. And first Hashem tells us Ma'aseh Bereishis, which is minor things that a child can appreciate. And then he gets to Achayish Hazalachem that talks about the halachas. The same thing, this type of connection to Hashem needs to be in a spiritual state of developing that connection. Line 6, Al Shalzeh Boim La'achrish Nimtzoim Tchila B'mayim D'Matzav D'Ben Kot. We arrive at this by first being in a state and situation of being a minor child, being only in a way how a child's relationship to his father is in this world, and through his avodah that he works on, he now matures and becomes greater, and then he's up to the level of achodesh hazalachem. And these two types of avodah, the child type of avodah versus the mature adult type of avodah, and these are the two types of avodah of sublimating and transforming klippah, like was explained earlier in a mimer previous to this of Bassi Legani that the Rebbe said on that year, he said multiple Basar Leganis because of Shabbos. So he explained that idea of the Skafia and Ishapcha.